Bedford St. Martin's. I want to thank you for joining us today for our first webinar with Comp Ed Month. Andrea Lunsford, Teaching Academic Writing in Digital Age. Andrea is the author of numerous titles, including most recently, Everything's an Argument and The Everyday Writer. If you have the opportunity to speak with Andrea or to hear her give a presentation like she's going to today, you'll hear her enthusiasm for how students are creating and composing projects today. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Andrea.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Please make a note if you can't. I want to say that just as I was getting up this morning, I was listening to an interview with Sherry Turkle from MIT about her new book, Reclaiming Conversation. And in it, she makes a strong, very strong case for the importance of face-to-face conversation in developing empathy. And she says that over the last 20 years, her research has shown that young people today are less able to identify how others are feeling, in other words, that they are less empathetic. And so she wants to reclaim conversation as a way of building our sense of empathy with others. I certainly agree that that's very important. So here we are, not face-to-face, but divided by our digital devices, but we're going to do the best we can to have a conversation anyway. I'm very happy to speak with you this morning and to talk about the challenges that we face in teaching academic writing today. Certainly is a major challenge looming at all of us. Looming, I don't even think it's looming. It's been with us for some time now. And I'm very anxious to hear how you are responding to the affordances of the new literacy and especially to students' abilities to compose in multiple modes. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I thought I would begin with talking just a moment about school writing, or what Shirley Heath and Marcia Farr call essayistic writing. Next slide, please. So if you look in textbooks, including my own textbooks, you will find academic discourse, academic writing defined in various ways, but it will almost always include these characteristics: clear patterns of organization, logical relationships marked with transitions and other cues, explicit claims, the conventions of a particular field, careful documentation, and standard edited English. Now, I would say that that has been the standard definition of academic writing for a long time, certainly since I came into the profession, which is now 47, well, nearly 50 years ago. But this definition is being challenged or put under pressure by, as you all know, by new media, by new technologies, and by, I think, by the return of the oral and oral components of writing. I don't know if you've read Peter Elbow's Vernacular Eloquence. It's a long read, I'll say that, and it shouldn't have been so long, but it's a wonderful book. The point that he makes about what speaking can bring to writing today, what speaking does bring to writing. So we're seeing a meshing of written and oral forms, and that is affecting academic discourse, I think, in some pretty positive ways, because I believe that academic writing across fields is getting to be a little more friendly than it has been in the past. So I want to pause to see if anyone wants to add characteristics to what the traditional definition of academic writing. Anybody wants to put something up for our discussion, I will read it out. So please, if you want to jump into the to this somewhat artificial conversation we're having. I'll pause just a minute to see if anybody wants to do that.
Robin Shaver asked, what was the name of the book?
The name of Peter Elbow's book is Vernacular Eloquence, and it's published by Oxford University Press. I think it might be 1 year old. It's not just brand new, but it's not all that old either. And Peter has been, in the last 10 years, very much engaged in talking about the vernacular aspects of students' discourse and arguing for bringing vernaculars into academic writing. So that means, you know, everyday speech patterns and some of the liveliness of spoken English into our school writing. So I see a question. I wonder if school writing is most analogous to students' views of right versus wrong writing. Yes, I think absolutely students do view their school writing as needing to be correct, almost hyper-correct. And so part of our challenge in working with young people is to get them to play with language and play with their sentences, play with their paragraphs, see if they could make them come more alive, even if they are on the edge of correctness sometimes. They don't always have to be specifically correct. And, for instance, in using a sentence fragment, I think fragments can be very powerful in academic writing. So that's and what is often termed an error that I think can be used for special effect. And I think there are many such things. I don't know if you saw if you've seen the latest issue of 3 C's, but in it there's an article on hyperbole that makes the case for the ways that student writers tend to use hyperbole, and that can also be effective in some instances. I think hyperbole especially can add to the humor of academic writing, if there is such a thing. So thank you, Chris, for that question. And I see Mick Howard says that academic writing tends to follow an artificial prompt not generated by the student, at least in more traditional pedagogy. I think that's true, too, especially across the disciplines other than rhetoric and writing studies. I think in our classes, students are more able to name their own topics than they are in some of their other classes. So maybe we'll move on then to this next slide. I heard a TEDx talk the other day on a student talk from, I think she was from a CUNY school, and her subject was why more young women are interested in science, and she describes the academic discourse of science. I really loved this so much that I wrote it down. She said that kind of writing is old, dry, and moldy. And then she paused in her TEDx talk and said, I really like that word moldy. And it's just how that writing strikes me. It is moldy. So I tend to agree with her that a lot of academic discourse is certainly dry. And I don't know about the moldy part, but she was making a strong statement. I see another question. Are we doing a disservice to those students who will be writing in academia and the professional world who are not open or responsive to the idea of vernacular eloquence? No, I don't think we're doing a disservice to them to open their eyes to the possibility of the things that Peter advocates in his book, things like paying attention to the rhythm of your prose. I don't think that's doing a disservice. I think that professional writing is also changing and will also change under the same influences that are affecting academic writing. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see professional writing change before academic writing does. Would it be possible to have that PowerPoint slides after the presentation? Absolutely, for what they're worth, absolutely. Do you think academic writing is moldy because of the lag time of publishing vis-a-vis instant publishing online? No, I don't think that's it. I think it has to do with style And with what we learned in all of us who went to graduate school, I certainly got hammered into the academic mold pretty successfully. I learned to walk the walk and talk the talk of my academic discipline, which was at the beginning literary studies and then rhetoric and composition studies. And I remember writing a piece early on in my graduate career, in my master's degree a long time ago, in which I was writing a review or report, really, on Richard Altick's The Scholar Adventurers. And if you've never seen that book, it's very old now, but it is a rip-roaring, page-turning account of how scholarship can be an adventure. And I was so caught up in it, and I was so enthralled. And I wrote this glowing, bordering perhaps on the hagiographic report on Professor Altick, and my teacher was not amused and said, you must learn to keep your critical wits about you and keep your enthusiasms under control. So I certainly learned to do that, and I think probably all of you did too. And I'm not advocating that we abandon our critical wits, but that we learn to share our critical wits with others in as easygoing a way as possible. And that's where I think we're headed. I hope we're headed in our rhetoric and composition classes. So we can skip over this next slide. This young woman, I think, is not alone, and I want to share one other anecdote here about my own teaching. One of the last seminars I taught before I retired a year or two ago from teaching full-time was a course called the Digital Essay, and I had a wonderful time. We had a very good group, but it was a small seminar, and 6 or 8 students. And when I went in on the first day, I was very surprised because I'm used to having more students than that sign up for classes. And when I asked them to go around and introduce themselves and say why they had chosen this class to participate in, I think 5 of them said, well, we almost didn't sign up. It didn't sound interesting. And I said, well, why not? And they said, because it said essay. And it was that word essay that they had a very negative response to. They were thinking of the word essay as the kind of 5-paragraph and expanded 5-paragraph themes that they learned to write in high school, and they didn't want any more of it. And I think they also associate the word essay with this essayistic tradition that's grown up around school writing, and they wanted to break out of that. Now, of course, they didn't know about the tradition of the essay stretching back to Montaigne, and it's always been in the tradition of the essay to push the envelope, to try to be experimental, to try new things. And so once they found out that we were going to do that, then they were more with me in that course. So if we can go to the next slide, I do think that change is in the air. You all know from just reading magazines and newspapers and things online that paragraphs are getting shorter. Paragraph length has shortened over the last 100 years, 125 years perhaps, under the influence first of newspapers with broadsheets and then newspapers in the 19th century with their narrow columns. And with those narrow columns came shorter paragraphs. And they're also getting less dense, as I measure them at any rate, by lexical density. Writers are using still and moving images, sound, color, and more in their academic writing. We all know that. Very exciting possibilities for writers today. Others are making their academic discourse interactive, inviting immediate response. And as we're trying to do today in this presentation, to have immediate response. But students now are able, on blogs, for instance, to write very serious postings and get response from others immediately. And in the academy, some authors are now putting their chapters of books or even whole books on the web for people to respond to before they are published officially. I've seen 3 academic books like that, although I'm drawing a blank on what they are now. If you're interested, I can dig out the volumes, or you may know them and can contribute that to the conversation right now. But I think that's a really exciting idea as an author to get your work out there and let people respond to it, and then go back to the drawing board and revise some more and then publish. Certainly, conventions are becoming somewhat less formal. My colleague, one of my colleagues at Stanford who writes a lot for the New York Review of Books and for the London Times, says that she would have slit a wrist before she would ever have started a sentence with a conjunction like and or but now she does it all the time because she thinks it makes her writing more conversational and more rhythmic. So when I first knew her, she had a list of do's and don'ts that she handed out to students in every graduate seminar, and that was among them, and it is now gone from her own code. Tone is more conversational, I think. Now, I'm going to pause again and see if you would like to chip in with some other changes that you see coming into academic discourse in our field or in other fields. I think I'd love to hear about that. While you're thinking about that, Christine asks, do you think it's beneficial to use other words besides essay? Well, I learned that if I wanted to engage Stanford students in my classes, it would be good to avoid that word. But I don't want to give up the term because I think it's meant to be a very flexible term. And we'll talk about that some more later. But writing projects is a term that we are using at Stanford now a lot in our own curriculum, that we talk about the students' work as a project rather than as an essay. Part of the project might turn out to be an essay. The students that I'm working with often begin by writing a piece of research that is more or less an argumentative essay, and then they begin transforming it into other modes, into websites, into oral presentations, and so forth. And that all then becomes part of their term project. That's a really good question. Thank you. I'm always surprised students still ask if they can use I. Yes, well, of course, in our field, they can use I. There is a researcher, I think from Wake Forest, named Laura All, A-U-L-L, who's written a book about, she's a corpus linguist, and she's written a book about research she's done with students in her own classes using corpus linguistics and the corpora in there to answer questions about their own writing. That's a very vast oversimplification. It's a wonderful book. But in it, and I've adapted with Laura's help some of her advice, and it appears in this edition of the Everyday Writer. I'm really happy about it, that we can help students learn to access these gigantic corpora with billions of words in them, and they can query them about something like the use of the word I, and in fact I did that. And I could see how I was used across disciplines, and it is used most in the humanities, but it is also used in physics, but you can see percentage-wise how often that particular word is used. So I thought that was really exciting use of corpus linguistics for everyday students. So yes, I think it's fine to use I, although I do tell my students you can certainly go too far with it. If everything is all about you, it's not going to be it may not be so interesting to your audience. Yes, we are prizing individual voice, I hope, although I think there's a recognition that individual voices are now made up of other voices. Well, Christine, I like this comment about peer review too, as well, to ask students to distribute their work to a public audience before writing a final draft. Absolutely. And my students do that kind of work in their dorms and in their organizations. They get a lot of feedback on their writing and on their presentations as well, because so our students are doing lots and lots of presentations. Any other comments on this little change is in the air section? Now here's a comment about portfolios. Thank you, Susan. Here have peer reviews enabled disclosure of personal identity instead of anonymity in the writing classroom. Boy, can you remember back to when we were very first working on the online with students, and we would set up chat groups, and they were all, everybody had a pseudonym, and we quickly found out that in those kinds of exchanges, it was more difficult to guide the conversations, and people were likely to act out in destructive ways if they were anonymous, if they were pseudonymous. And so we pretty changed that and started using real names in our exchanges. And I think that has been beneficial. I think we do need to teach to take responsibility for your own words in all of your exchanges with others. Portfolios, I'd like to hear more about what you're thinking about the use of portfolios. I am a proponent of portfolio development and think that it is a way for students to follow their own growth as writers and for them to learn to see themselves as writers who are constantly developing and kind of track that development over time. That's all part of an attempt to help students make time for reflection. And this is so incredibly difficult for all of us today, to find a moment when we can sit quietly and reflect on what we are learning, what we have learned, what we have written. I've written some in the Everyday Writer and also in Everything's an Argument about Richard Lanham's Economics of Attention. I don't know if you know that book. In it, he argues that we have moved from what he calls a stuff society, which is like the industrial world, to a fluff society of information and of commodities that are being presented to us through advertising, trying to get us to buy them. And the only way, Lanham says, the only way they have now to attract our attention is through their style, or the major way anybody has to get and hold our attention is through style. So he argues that we should be paying a lot more attention to style today than we have been in the past 100 years or so, for sure. I think it's a powerful argument, and it is corroborated by the work of Howard Rheingold in his, I think it's his most recent book called NetSmart, How to Thrive Online, where he talks about our need for infotension. And both of them say we need to help our students today learn to pay attention to attention itself. What are they attending to? And to help them see that they really can't multitask. Howard Rheingold says some people can multitask, and he talks about brain surgeons and fighter pilots as two kinds of people who do need to multitask, but he says they have to spend Malcolm Gladstone's 10,000 hours to be able to do it. So asking students to find a moment to reflect on what they're attending to think about what gets and holds their attention, and then to try to think about how they can get and hold others' attention. And to come back to our subject today, it's hard to get and hold attention in what as our young woman called it, dry, old, moldy discourse. That is not the way to do it. So I think we are seeing change in the air. Let's see what you're saying here. Change is certainly reflected in the way technology. Whoops, where did that go? I've lost that comment on my screen. Let me see if I can find it. Yes. Templates writing in digital space is often considered more democratic than academic writing, yet that is not always so. I certainly agree with that. Yes, absolutely. The templates can seem democratic, but they just do our thinking for us. How does changes affect the register, formal as opposed to informal? I think we are becoming more informal in our academic writing. and I think that's a good thing. Here's a proponent of portfolios, non-grading experiment way back in the 70s, extensive comments on students' work instead of grades. You know, I've been thinking about whether we're going to be able to have machines grade writing, and here's what I would say about that. If a computer program could be devised that could respond to a polished final draft and get pretty close to how I would respond, I would buy that machine or that program immediately, because if that would be the case, it would free me up to do what I do in the Writing Center, which is be the coach, the tutor, the helper, the questioner, the interrogator, all the things that I get to do when I'm working with a student on a draft, but which I don't get to do when I sit down with a stack or a file of final essays or final projects to be responded to. So I'm not too afraid of this machine grading. I don't think it'll ever be able to do what we do, especially on the run-up to that final draft. Susan comments again, having students read the comments and discuss them with me in conferences. Yes, see, now they're coming back to Sherry Turkle's idea of conversation, and I think it's why at Stanford we absolutely guarantee our students that we will have a minimum of 3 conferences with them every term. We will sit down with them face-to-face, one-on-one, talking about the issues in their writing. And we, in that environment, in that situation, we can read aloud. We can hear what those words sound like. And I can respond to the student who asked me once when I was giving a lecture at UC Irvine to about 1,000 students. This kid stood up in the audience and said, "Professor Lunsford, can you tell me how I can make my sentences sing?" I'll never forget that question. And I had a little bit of an answer to it about rhythm and prose and so forth, but I couldn't really respond to him in a group of 1,000. But sitting beside that student at the Writing Center or in my office, yes, sir, we can look at those sentences and we can find ways to make them sing. And that's the beauty of conferences and the beauty of conversation in our teaching. Okay, perhaps we'll go to the next slide, which just gives some concrete examples of these changes that I see around me. If you check out the med school on your campus or talk to doctors that you know, you may find that they are adopting narrative over the charts that used to be at the bottom of a bed in a patient's room. And doctors are now writing stories about the patient and finding that they are communicating better both with the patients and with the personnel they're working with, in particular the nurses. So I see that as a change coming to medical discourse, and I think it's a part of the change that's in the air. Scientists are delivering academic discourse in sometimes playful ways. I don't know how many of you read Phys Review letters or anything like that, but occasionally I dip into them, and I was reading one not long ago where a group of physicists had band together and given themselves a nickname like the Harvard Crimson, or I've forgotten exactly what their nickname was, but they said that there were so many of them that they needed a team name, and that if they listed all of the individual authors in this piece, it would be longer than the piece itself. So they were going to adopt this nickname for their team. And a very playful kind of engagement in this very, very serious academic journal. Social scientists use case studies to let subjects speak for themselves in everyday language. I think we see that in our field, certainly, but also in the field of social sciences, psychology in particular. I've seen some ethnographic studies particularly that allow the subjects a great leeway and where the subject's voices are not overlaid with a huge interpretive frame. And, of course, in many fields, formal documentation is giving way to links. I'd like to hear what you think about that. My students are sort of resisting the idea of formal documentation today, and they would just rather put links. And when they put their work online, yes, the links are wonderful because then we can go right to the source. How much do we still value formal documentation of sources in our field, and what is our responsibility to our students? I'm still arguing to my students that they need, for their academic work, they need to be scrupulous in their documentation. They need to let us know where they got information and how we might trace it. And links can disappear, but formal documentation will not. So do you have anything to, can you add some other examples from other fields or from our own field where you see a change in the air of professional or academic discourse? Wouldn't you love to see a business report that was in the form of a story? There may be such things out there, and in fact, I think they would be probably much more readable. You probably do know the story of the 9/11 report. When it came out, it was, thousands of pages, and nobody was reading it. And then it occurred to the governmental agency that was responsible for it that if they told it as a graphic narrative, it might sell and people might read it, and indeed it did. And that's an example of the way images are coming into our discourse. We could talk forever about that, or at least I could bore you insensible with how much I like to teach courses on comics and how I love to dwell on visual rhetoric and on images. But certainly I think that the government and many other groups have found that adopting images, graphic narratives in particular, in some of their work, it makes the work more engaging, more readable, and therefore more powerful. Yes, cross-disciplinary knowledge is becoming a must, but it's really hard. And interdisciplinarity and cross-disciplinarity is they're really hard to do. But yes, students need to be able to move across media, across genre, and across disciplines. Kenneth Burke said a long time ago, when students move from discipline to discipline, it's like moving from universe to universe, and nobody's giving them a guide on how to do it. Some of that, I think, does come within our compass, and I think we do a pretty good job of it. Yes, knowledge of coding and design becoming absolutely mandatory for student writers today. Susan says she values formal documentation. However, to make the variety of disciplinary formats more palatable, I've explained that if a student learns one well, he can extrapolate and adapt to other forms easily. I completely agree with that. And in my own textbooks, which include MLA, APA, CBE, Chicago, the advice I give to students is to choose one, learn it, and use it, but don't be obsessed about it. That's what the reference book is there for. That's what examples are there for. I will say that as hard as I've tried to include examples in my textbooks in the documentation sections from everything I think students might want to cite, it is an impossible job. And when a student once came to me that, well, it happens all the time, with something like this. Professor Lunsford, I found a video clip of Alison Bechtel doing pull-ups in her basement and talking about Fun Home. And I wanted to use it in my project. And then I found out that it came from a TV show in Vermont that had been lifted from a radio interview, and that had also been published in the local newspaper. Now, how do I cite that? Well, so you can probably think of many other examples, but the advice I always give is to look in whatever book you have, a reference book or a textbook that has a citation in it, bibliographical citations in it. Look for a model that most closely resembles what you're trying to cite. So in this instance, I think it would be a video clip, and then you cite it that way. you follow that model as closely as you can, but if you can't follow it exactly, don't worry. Do the best you can to help your reader find that source. Social media discourages student interest in any kind of documentation. That's for sure. So I don't know that I can interest students in documentation. I can engage them about it, and I think it's also important to talk about the ideology of documentation systems and the history of documentation systems. And our devotion to documenting sources is not age-old. It grew up in the 18th century along with copyright and with the Industrial Revolution and with capitalism and with what I call radical individualism. They're all tied together. In earlier discourse, you don't find those quotation marks crowding in on everything. We're the ones that are obsessed with ownership and have been for about going on 300 years. I think we're seeing a breakdown of that now. I love the fact that we have an alternative, at least one alternative to traditional copyright. That's Larry Lessig's Creative Commons. So I think students, they can be intellectually engaged by where this came from. Why did we do this to ourselves? When Jonathan Swift argued against it, he did not want formal documentation, and I think he wanted little symbols, if I'm remembering correctly, like a finger that points in at the margin if there's something important in there, like a quotation. So this didn't come about overnight. It was a long struggle, and I think students can be interested in that. And in terms of ideology, why is it that most style houses allow the use of at all instead of every author's name? I've worked against that for so long, I finally got the MLA to change and to say that you could list all the names. Because what that does, that at all flattens out everybody else that contributed to that piece. And why is it that APA uses initials only? Why is it that they put the date early and we put it late? The humanities tends to put it late. Those are questions of ideology as well as of style. So I don't know if you've got any ideas about how to interest students in documentation. Please post them for us now. We can go to the next slide to talk about the way people in our field are pushing the boundaries of academic discourse. And I don't know if you've ever read that very old article that Bob Connors and I wrote many years ago called Frequency of Error in Student Writing or something like that. And the subtitle was Ma and Pa Kettle Do Research. You may not even know who Ma and Pa Kettle were, but they were these bumbling actors on TV that were always going on adventures. Ma and Pa Kettle go to Paris and so forth, and they were absolute hilarious hillbilly-type bumblers. And so Bob and I took on the guise of Ma and Pa Kettle in this article, and we had a tremendous amount of fun writing it. And we had to revise it a lot to get it published. And 3Cs finally published it. They took out the very best footnote in the whole article because it was an absolute riff on a group of young people staying at the hotel we stayed in to do the analysis of the thousands of papers that we analyzed to be able to write the article about frequency of formal errors. We were in a hotel in Columbus, Ohio, the Holiday Inn across from campus, and we checked in ready to work the next day, all day, and the next day on coding these papers. And we found that we were the only adults in the entire hotel, with the exception of 2 beleaguered counselors. The entire hotel had been taken over by the Pentecostal Youth of Ohio, and they were running wild. Our phones were ringing, the students were calling, they were running up and down the hall, pounding on doors. And so Bob and I wrote this, we thought, very witty riff on our engagement with the Pentecostal Youth of Ohio, and the editors firmly took it out and censored us. At any rate, that was an early example in our field of somebody, in this case Bob and I, trying to push the boundaries of academic discourse. We did get a lot of flack about that article, I can tell you. How dare we make fun of empirical methods, research methods, and what do we think we're doing, and we're undercutting the seriousness of our own writing. We politely disagreed. And I know you all know the work of Geneva Smitherman, who's led the way in code switching in academic discourse. Vershawn Young, Other People's English, Suresh Canagarajah has worked a lot with the concept of code meshing, both he and Vershawn Young. This, I think, has a lot to do with what Peter Elbow is talking about in vernacular eloquence. I don't know if you know Lee Tonouchi's work. He's very, very well known in Hawaii, and he writes in Hawaiian Pidgin and publishes, he's published an entire book, but he also published an essay, I believe in College English, in Hawaiian Pidgin that I read without any trouble whatsoever and got a lot out of it. So our field, I think, is in the forefront, really, of trying to see what we can do to work with academic discourse and to make it as alive and as up close and personal and engaging and energizing as we can. And it's at this point that I'd like to watch a clip from Adam Banks's Chair's address. If Jillian can help pull it up, it's just about 3 minutes, I think. And I want you to start listening hard when he says, this is a time for experimentation or experiment. Jillian, do we have it? I hope.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Adam.
All right. Want me to go ahead?
Yes, please. Sorry. I don't hear any sound.
One moment. Let me see. I'm not sure the sound is connecting up because I'm on.
I'll just respond to treasure hunt exercises. Sources are hidden or mixed up, and having students try to find the actual sources. Yes. Finding out how long it takes to do it this way instead of having access to correct. Yes. That's absolutely the case. Yeah, it's really handy to have some of those, some good resources when you're trying to do documentation. And I've worked very hard in my books on those source maps that try to guide students in how to do what they're doing. We may not be able, I don't know if we're going to be able to hear Adam. I really wanted to hear this little clip because it's such a good example of his ability to mix genres and to come up with something. I think his talk is an essay. It is in the Montaigne tradition, but he is so wonderfully adept at mixing colloquial language, the language of hip-hop, the language of funk, in with his academic discourse. And in fact, I wrote a blog about all the things that I saw him doing here. It was quite a performance. And I also know how nervous he was before it, but I think he brought it off really well. Jillian, are we having any luck or not?
Can you hear it?
Nope.
No. Oh, no. Let me...
Oh, technology. Are any of you out there, were you at Four Seasons, did you hear his address? Is anybody who's online hear Adam deliver this? And if so, would you tell us? Maybe nobody.
Let me give it one more shot. Can you hear it?
Nope. Well, let me say this. If you did not hear this talk, I recommend that you go right to YouTube and look it up. It's called Funk, Flight, and Freedom. It's called, the whole title is Ain't No Walls Behind the Sky, Baby, Funk, Flight, and Freedom. And it's about 35 minutes long maybe, and I think you would very, very much enjoy hearing it. The piece that I wanted you to hear was where he talks about this is the time for experimentation. This is the time for risk-taking. This is the time for us to get out of the box of academic discourse and see what we can really do in our own work as well as working with our students. And he, in the middle of this clip that I wanted us to see, he stops, pulls himself up to his full height and says, and so by the power vested in me for this 35 minutes, I want to declare the essay retired. I want to say, dear essay, you are now emeritus. And he goes on to say, now, don't worry. We're going to let you keep your office on campus. We are going to continue to give prizes in your honor. But you are right now formally retired. And, of course, by essay there, he meant the school essay, the 5-paragraph theme that students have labored under lo these many decades. And that was just brought the house down, of course. But then he went on to detail what the essay, the school essay, had given us and what its strengths were, and then talk about how it could be expanded through funk, flight, and freedom, and his meditations on those words and the way they're related to us. I was particularly taken with his discussion of flight, of how he wants his own writing to take flight, and he wants the writing of our students to be able to grow wings and take flight to freedom. And for him, that freedom means the freedom to be himself in all of his many roles and selves in this particular Four-C's address. So I'm really sorry we couldn't hear that, and I apologize. But we can go on because we are getting close to our time, and I want to hear from you as much as possible. So let's go to that, Jillian. Let's go to the slide about what are core writing teachers supposed to do. That's the next one, yeah. People ask me this a lot. All right, so all these new things are possible. What are we supposed to do? And I always respond by saying, in my experience in our field, nearly 50 years, every time I turn around, I have to learn something new. And that's part of what has energized me so and kept me such a member, happy member of the field of rhetoric and writing studies. Now we're having to ask, what of the old literacy, the school essay, the old ways of arguing and writing, what do we want to hold on to? And what do we want to make room for in terms of new literacies? Now, when what I say is, so here's something I want to hold on to, and it is that sustained, careful argument. I don't want to lose the ability to do that, and I think if we want to hold on to that part of the old literacy, we have to teach it. We have to teach it, and we have to engage students in doing it over and over and over again. Learning is accretive, and we learn by repetition. And when my colleague, Terry Winograd, who is the head of Stanford's Computer-Human Collaboratory, asked me to come give a talk about collaborative writing, and I did. At the end of it, he said, I do not know why you're carrying on so about this kind of writing that you're a proponent of. Students today don't need to do that. All they need to do is to be able to put a little bunch of writing on screen, what Winston Weathers called cross, a little lexia here, lexia there, and that's all they need. They don't need these long, sustained. And so we really got into it, and I said it doesn't have to be long, that's 50 pages, but it has to be sustained. You have to be able to work through something carefully, thoughtfully, through all of its ramifications. The ability to think like that in prose, I don't want to lose. So that's something I want to hold on to. And then we have to decide what we want to make room for in our classes. And here at Stanford, we're making room for all kind of multimodal composing while still trying to hold on to the sustained argument. I think our challenge is to engage our students in making academic discourse new, in changing it and sending them out to see what they can do. One of my students did a directed reading with me on is writing performative. It started out saying writing was not performative, it was this dull stuff you did in response to assignments, and you turned it in, and that's what writing was. But we worked for a whole term on this question, and he became convinced that writing could be very performative, and in fact, he developed a software program called the Performativity Rater, and I helped him do the algorithms, or decide what the algorithms would be in the Performativity Rater, and he could then take a Martin Luther King essay and put it through, and Martin Luther King would get a very high performativity rating score, and he'd put one of my essays through and get a very low performativity score. Anyway, in one of his biology assignments, he decided he would use this performance, what he'd learned about performance, and so he wrote his the biology assignment he was supposed to do and turned it in, and his TA met him at the door the next day, gave it back to him and said, "I have to pass you because you did answer the assignment, but if you ever do this again, I will kill you." And he had told stories and used images and put in metaphor, and he was, his biology TA was not amused. So we also have to teach students that they have to learn to keep their critical wits about them and know their audience in terms of how far they can push envelopes in various directions. So I do have some references that will come to you in the slides if you want them. You don't have to spend time with those. So now, what would you like to talk about or discuss about the issues that we've raised here? I'm turning this over to anybody who wants to speak. There are the references. And I've stunned everybody into silence. I apologize. Now, the essay is not only about writing, it's also about helping students organize and articulate thoughts. Isn't this still valid? Absolutely, yes. Yeah. In fact, I've spent a lot of time on organization in my in textbooks, talking about how to approach organization. I had a graduate student once who used sticky notes in her teaching, and she had students, instead of a rough draft, they wrote all their main ideas on sticky notes and then put them all up on the board and then started rearranging them until they found, with her and their colleagues' guidance, found a good organization. There are many, many ways to go about talking with students about organization. Sherry Turkle, in an earlier work, makes the point. She's talking about the danger of using presentation slides with bullet points on them, and she says, you know, students will make a slide with 3 bullet points on it and assume that they are logically related. Well, not necessarily so. And if they're not, then the students have to build the logical relationships for us, for the audience in that presentation. So thank you for that. Anybody else want to chime in? I wish we were having a face-to-face conversation and I could see you. Well, if everybody is exhausted, perhaps we should sign off. I'm certainly available if you want to talk more about any of these issues. You can reach me by email, lunsford@stanford.edu. I would love to carry on the conversation. And I look forward to seeing many of you, I hope, at one of our meetings. I'm certainly going to be in Houston for 4Cs. I'm headed to the Feminisms and Rhetorics Conference tomorrow morning, in fact, in Arizona, and hope I might run into some of you there. Thank you so much for putting up with this presentation, listening to me today. I hope that you will have a wonderful rest of the term in your own teaching.
We want to thank everyone for coming, just like Andrea said, and also you can also follow Andrea on Bedford Bits, which is now part of our new community site where you get to exchange teaching ideas, download professional resources, and lots of other good things. So we encourage you to go and take a look at that and sign up to join our community. We'll also be following up to this webinar with a recording, and please let us know if you have questions. Thank you again for attending. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks. Thank you, Emily.